The temple construction. In chapter 8, Solomon's building the temple, and he actually builds the first temple. The Jewish people organize their history. Christian people, we organize history according to Jesus Christ. So we have what? Before Christ, and we have what? The year of our Lord, out of AD. We have AD and BC. We do things around Christ. The Jewish people, they have what's called the first temple period. The first temple period is from Solomon down to the Babylonian captivity. The Babylonians are going to wipe it out in 586. And then remember, Ezra and Nehemiah, around that time, the temple gets rebuilt. And the second temple goes from the time of Ezra and Nehemiah down to the time of Jesus. And Jesus will come into the second temple, and then the Romans will wipe out the second temple. So the Jews, they designated first temple period and second temple period. That's how they date these periods. First temple period, second temple period. Solomon's going to put the first temple. Now, how does he do it? He goes up to Lebanon. David actually set this up with this guy named Hiram. And he goes up there to Hiram, and he says, Hiram, I want some cedars of Lebanon. Hiram says, man, our truckers are on strike and stuff. We can't get this stuff down to you. But what we'll do is they'll throw the cedars of Lebanon into the ocean, and they basically float them down to today what's Tel Aviv or Joppa, and then from Joppa up to Jerusalem. So that the people actually, they throw these cedars of Lebanon, huge trees, they throw them in the ocean and float them down to Israel. It's kind of an interesting way in which they built these things, and they built ships and stuff from the cedars of Lebanon. Solomon then takes these cedar trees, overlays the rocks and stuff, and then covers them over with gold, and it was an incredible thing. Now, Solomon offers a dedicatory prayer here. This is in chapter 8, verse 27. The temple is Solomon's biggest achievement in his life. The temple is his biggest achievement in his life. He builds the temple for God that his father so much wanted. Solomon actually builds it. And here's what he prays at his biggest achievement of his life. Verse 27. He says, but will God really dwell on earth? The heavens, even the highest heavens, cannot contain you. How much less this temple I have built. The heavens of heavens can't contain you. How much less this temple I have built. This is the biggest achievement of his life. Does Solomon still have things in perspective? He has things in perspective. This temple is nothing to God. This temple is nothing to God. God is the God of the universe. And how much less this temple. So Solomon seems to have it together. He takes his greatest achievement, and rather than bragging about it, he seems to have a sense, you know what I'm saying? His head doesn't get too big. His head doesn't get too big. So Solomon seems to be pretty wise here. Solomon's fame, the Queen of Sheba comes up to see Solomon, and she travels all the way up from the place you guys would call Yemen. Do you guys know where Yemen is? Kind of on the south side of the Saudi Arabian Peninsula. She comes from down around Yemen. She comes from Sheba. She comes all the way up, it's over 1,000 miles, up to see Solomon. And basically she quizzes him with hard questions. And then one of the texts, one of the translations says, her breath was taken away at Solomon's wisdom. And she raves, saying, Solomon, you are wiser than all I was told from my country. You are wiser than I could have imagined. And she brags on Solomon. But you notice what's happening here? Does Solomon brag about himself? No. Do other people, the Queen of Sheba, Hiram, do they brag about Solomon? So Solomon doesn't speak in the text. Solomon doesn't speak. Very rarely in the text does Solomon speak. Do other people speak about Solomon? And they rave. Is that a mark of a wise man? Is that a mark of a wise man? He doesn't brag about himself. Other people brag about him. He doesn't brag about himself. I think this is a mark of a wise man Solomon has. Now, Solomon's folly. What's the problem here? Chapter 11, it saves it up. Solomon marries many wives, foreign wives, and basically their hearts go after. Now, a couple things. Solomon had, 700 wives and 300 concubines. But before Solomon even became king, he was married to this Ammonitess before he became king. And before his dream at Gibeon for the wisdom, he had already married the Pharaoh's daughter. So Solomon already was starting on this. In other words, they've saved up all these women to this point. Rehoboam, his son, is 41 when Solomon dies after 40 years of reigning. This raises then this question, and I kind of want to end here. Let me just read what the text says. And they were from many nations, which the Lord had told the Israelites, you must not intermarry. And as Solomon grew old, his wives turned his heart after other gods, and his heart was not fully devoted to the Lord, the God of his father David, or the heart of the father David, his father, had been. He followed Ashtaroth, the goddess of the Sidonians, and Moloch, the detestable god of the Ammonites. So Solomon did evil in the eyes of the Lord. He did not follow the Lord completely, as his father David had done. And on the east hill, over here, he even built an altar to Chemosh, where they offered up their God. They offered up to God their children. They burned their children to God. Solomon burning children to Chemosh, the god of, in that case, it would be Moab or Edom or Ammon over there. Is it possible for someone to turn away from the Lord? I just want to ask that question. Is it possible for someone to turn away from the Lord? When I was younger, I was very much into a thing called Calvinism and things like that. Once saved, always saved. With Solomon, did Solomon turn away at the end of his life and even serve other gods? Yeah, at the end of his life. Now, some people suggest that Ecclesiastes tells that Solomon came back to the Lord. At the end of his life, Solomon in Ecclesiastes is an old man. Proverbs, Ecclesiastes chapter 12, he's an old man in Ecclesiastes 12, and he comes back to the Lord. Is that possible? Yes, it's possible. Have you seen people go away from the Lord and not come back? And I've had a friend that went through a divorce. His wife got the kid, and this guy taught with me at a very, very, very conservative school. He taught with me, and all I remember our last conversation, he said, F God, F God, F God, 30 times, must have been in 5 minutes. He was so angry at God for destroying his marriage. Now, question, who really destroyed his marriage? But anyways, so he blamed God for that and stuff, and he turned his back on God. Now, is it possible that he came back to the Lord? I don't know, 20, 30 years later, you might say yes. All I'm saying is I'm raising this question, is it possible for someone to know God and then turn away? Is that possible? And again, what I want to say to you, one step, right? There but for the grace of God go I. Doesn't make me, you don't be arrogant and think, I would never deny the Lord. Actually, who said that? I will never deny you. Yeah, and what happened? All I'm saying is humility a good thing? Humility is a good thing. So be careful how you think about people that turn away from the Lord. It's possible they'll come back, and we need to pray. We need to pray seriously for those types of people and ourselves, as our hearts are prone to wander.